A flight to reflect. LeBron James arrived at the private terminal, his tall frame effortlessly commanding attention as he strode past the glass walls. A small but enthusiastic crowd of fans had gathered, waving jerseys and snapping photos. He offered them a polite nod and a brief wave. It had been a grueling season, and this flight represented a rare moment of solace, a chance to unwind and reflect on his journey as one of the most celebrated athletes in the world. The first-class cabin of the private flight was nothing short of luxurious. Plush leather seats, ambient lighting, and the faint aroma of fresh flowers set a serene tone. LeBron adjusted his headphones, scanning the movie selection on his tablet. The soothing hum of the engines promised a quiet escape, something he desperately needed. Moments after takeoff, the flight attendants began their rounds. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze and a practiced smile, moved through the aisles, attending to the passengers. When she reached LeBron's seat, her eyes lingered for a moment too long. Her expression shifted subtly, just enough to spark an uneasy feeling. "Must be nice to afford this seat," she muttered under her breath as she passed by, loud enough for him to hear. LeBron paused, caught off guard by the comment. It wasn't the words themselves but the tone, sharp, almost mocking. He looked up, but the flight attendant was already moving on, her forced smile firmly in place. For a moment, he considered addressing it but decided against it. After all, he'd faced plenty of offhand remarks throughout his life. He wasn't here to start an argument. As the flight settled into a smooth rhythm, the same flight attendant returned with a tray of drinks. Her demeanor remained curt when she handed LeBron his glass of water, setting it down with a little more force than necessary, causing it to slosh slightly over the edge. She didn't acknowledge him further, briskly moving on to the next passenger. LeBron's patience was legendary, honed through years of high-pressure games and public scrutiny. But as the flight progressed, the pattern of behavior became impossible to ignore. While the other passengers were greeted with warmth and professionalism, her interactions with him were frosty, dismissive, and at times blatantly disrespectful. When he asked for a blanket, she sighed audibly before saying, "I'll see if we have extras," and didn't return for nearly an hour. Another passenger in the adjacent seat requested the same thing moments later and was promptly provided one with a cheerful smile. LeBron leaned back in his oversized seat, his jaw tightening. He wasn't someone who jumped to conclusions, but the flight attendant's behavior was deliberate. It wasn't just about poor service, it felt personal. The cabin atmosphere grew tense as the flight continued. Passengers nearby began to notice the interactions. A businessman 2 rows ahead glanced back uneasily after one particularly curt exchange, while an elderly woman seated across the aisle whispered to her companion. But no one said anything aloud. LeBron tried to focus on a documentary playing on his screen, but the mounting hostility was difficult to ignore. He replayed the flight attendant's words and actions in his mind, each interaction sharpening the edge of his frustration. This wasn't just a bad day for her. It was something deeper, something uglier. When the flight attendant returned with a tray of appetizers for the passengers in LeBron's section, she skipped over his seat entirely. "Sorry, we ran out," she said curtly, her tone devoid of the politeness she used with everyone else. LeBron glanced at the tray, which was still half full. "Really?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "Because it looks like there's plenty left." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, her mask of professionalism slipped. "It's reserved for other passengers," she snapped, her tone dripping with condescension. LeBron studied her, his expression steady. "Interesting," he said softly. "I guess respect isn't on the menu either." His words hit their mark. She faltered, turning abruptly and muttering something under her breath as she walked away. The tension in the cabin was now palpable. Other passengers were clearly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and casting nervous glances toward LeBron. One man across the aisle leaned slightly forward, his expression a mixture of sympathy and hesitation. But he said nothing. LeBron wasn't looking for a confrontation, but he also wasn't going to let the situation slide. He had faced adversity his entire life, from his humble beginnings in Akron to the global stage as a basketball icon. This wasn't just about him. It was about principle. The minutes ticked by, heavy with unspoken tension. The flight attendant avoided his section entirely, delegating another crew member to handle his requests. But the damage was done. LeBron's calm resolve had turned into a quiet determination. He knew this wasn't just a random encounter. It was a moment that demanded action. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, LeBron leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. His thoughts raced. Should he let it go, chalk it up to another case of implicit bias, or should he address it head-on? He wasn't just LeBron James, the NBA star. He was also a symbol of resilience, a voice for those who couldn't speak up. The decision came easily. This wasn't just about him anymore. Too many people endured this kind of treatment in silence, and he had the platform to make sure it didn't go unnoticed. Taking a deep breath, LeBron pressed the call button for the flight attendant. The light above his seat illuminated, casting a subtle glow over his section. A few passengers turned to watch. Their curiosity piqued. The next interaction would set the tone for the rest of the flight, and perhaps much more. The first confrontation. The call button above LeBron's seat glowed like a spotlight, drawing the attention of passengers nearby. The cabin remained eerily quiet except for the low hum of the engines. LeBron sat back in his seat, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing within. He wasn't one to seek confrontation, but this time, he couldn't let it slide. The flight attendant approached with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her stiff posture and tight-lipped expression spoke volumes before she even opened her mouth. "Yes, Mr. James," she said, her voice laced with feigned politeness. LeBron gestured to the empty tray table in front of him. "I noticed I was skipped for appetizers," he began, his tone steady but firm. "And it seems to be a recurring theme with the service I've received on this flight. Is there a reason for that?" Her smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, straightening her posture. "I assure you, sir, we treat all our passengers equally," she replied, her voice clipped. LeBron's eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. "If this is what you call equal treatment, I'd hate to see what it looks like when you're not trying." The tension between them thickened, drawing subtle attention from the other passengers. A businessman across the aisle leaned slightly forward, pretending to adjust his seatbelt, but it was clear he was listening intently. The elderly woman seated nearby tilted her head just enough to catch the exchange without being obvious. The flight attendant's expression hardened. "I don't appreciate the implication," she said, her voice now devoid of even a hint of professionalism. LeBron leaned forward slightly, his voice low and controlled. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts, and I'd like an explanation." The flight attendant opened her mouth to respond but was interrupted by a new voice. "Is there a problem here?" The cabin supervisor had appeared, his tailored uniform immaculate, and his demeanor one of carefully practiced neutrality. He glanced between LeBron and the flight attendant, his brow furrowed as he tried to gauge the situation. LeBron shifted his attention to the supervisor, his tone calm but firm. "Yes, there is. I've been treated differently from everyone else on this flight, and I'd like to understand why." The supervisor's eyes flicked toward the flight attendant, who now stood rigid, her arms crossed defensively. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," he said quickly, his tone conciliatory. "We value all our passengers and strive to provide excellent service." LeBron raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "A misunderstanding. Interesting choice of words. Do misunderstandings usually include skipping service and delivering curt responses while treating everyone else with a smile?" The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, his polished facade cracking under the weight of LeBron's steady gaze. I'll speak with the flight attendant privately and ensure that this is resolved," he stammered. LeBron leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed. "Good. Because if this is how you treat someone with a platform, I can't imagine what happens to those who can't speak up." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring the supervisor to argue. He nodded quickly, motioning for the flight attendant to follow him to the back of the cabin. She hesitated, her jaw tightening, before finally turning on her heel and walking away. The cabin remained tense after their departure. Whispers rippled through the passengers, some glancing nervously in LeBron's direction, while others exchanged looks of quiet approval. The businessman across the aisle leaned slightly toward LeBron. "Good for you," he said in a low voice, careful not to be overheard. Someone needed to say something. LeBron nodded in acknowledgement but remained silent. He wasn't seeking validation or applause. This was about accountability, and he wasn't finished yet. Minutes later, the supervisor returned, his expression tight with unease. The flight attendant trailed behind him, her posture defensive, and her face set in a mask of defiance. "Mr. James," the supervisor began, his voice carefully measured. "I've spoken with the flight attendant, and I'd like to personally apologize for any inconvenience or discomfort you've experienced. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously." LeBron studied the man for a moment before speaking. "An apology is a start," he said, his tone even. "But words don't erase actions. I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked for respect. And it seems that's in short supply on this flight." The flight attendant opened her mouth to speak, but the supervisor raised a hand, silencing her. He turned to LeBron, his face flushed with discomfort. "You're absolutely right, sir. We will address this matter thoroughly." LeBron leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "I hope so, because this isn't just about me. This kind of behavior happens far too often to people who don't have the platform to speak up. If I'm experiencing it, I can only imagine what others are going through." The supervisor nodded quickly, clearly eager to diffuse the situation. "Understood, sir. I'll personally ensure this doesn't happen again." LeBron's gaze shifted to the flight attendant, whose expression remained cold and unrepentant. "Good," he said simply, "because if it does, you'll be hearing about it." The supervisor nodded again, visibly relieved as LeBron signaled the end of the conversation. He and the flight attendant retreated to the back of the cabin, leaving the atmosphere in their wake heavy with tension. For the remainder of the flight, another crew member handled LeBron's section, their demeanor professional but clearly cautious. The flight attendant in question avoided his area entirely, her presence a distant reminder of the earlier conflict. As the plane began its descent, LeBron stared out the window, his mind racing. This was more than just a bad flight. This was a microcosm of a larger issue, one that too many people endured in silence. He resolved to take action, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. When the plane landed and the passengers began disembarking, LeBron adjusted his bag on his shoulder and stepped off the aircraft. A small crowd of fans and media awaited him at the terminal, their cameras flashing as he walked past. He offered them a polite wave but didn't stop to answer questions. As he entered the terminal, his manager Kevin was already waiting, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "I got your text," Kevin said, falling into step beside LeBron. "What happened?" LeBron recounted the events of the flight in a measured tone, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. Kevin listened intently, his expression hardening as the story unfolded. "This isn't just bad service," Kevin said firmly when LeBron finished. "This is discrimination, plain and simple. We can't let this slide." LeBron nodded. "We won't," he replied. "But I want to handle this the right way. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been treated like this and couldn't speak up." Kevin pulled out his phone, already dialing. "We're going to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug," he said, his voice resolute. "And after that, we're going to make sure the world knows." LeBron leaned against the terminal wall, crossing his arms as he watched Kevin make the call. He wasn't the type to stir up unnecessary drama, but this wasn't about drama. It was about justice. As the day unfolded, LeBron's determination only grew. This was just the beginning of a fight that would challenge not just one airline, but a system that allowed prejudice to persist unchecked. And LeBron James wasn't about to back down. A call to action. The morning after the flight, LeBron James woke up to a flood of messages on his phone. His agent, Kevin, had already sent multiple updates, along with links to news articles that hinted at rumblings of what had happened on board. Several outlets had somehow caught wind of the incident and were speculating about the nature of the conflict. LeBron scrolled through the headlines, each one a variation of the same theme. Discrimination at 35,000 feet. LeBron James faces hostility on private flight. He sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. This wasn't how he wanted the situation to escalate, but now that it had, he needed to take control of the narrative. He didn't want this to be about him. He wanted it to be about the bigger picture. Kevin's name flashed on the screen, and LeBron answered immediately. "You see the news." Kevin's voice was clipped, efficient. "It's already spreading. We need to decide how to respond." "I saw," LeBron replied. "I think it's time we say something. Not just about what happened to me, but about what this represents." Kevin hesitated, and LeBron could almost hear him pacing. "I agree," he said finally. "But we need to be strategic. Let's draft a statement, something powerful but measured. This can't be about anger. It has to be about accountability." An hour later, LeBron sat in his home office, staring at his laptop screen. The first draft of his statement was open in front of him, and Kevin was on a video call, offering suggestions. The words came slowly at first, but as LeBron reflected on the events of the flight and the countless stories he'd heard from fans and friends over the years, the statement began to take shape. He wanted it to be personal but universal, a call to action that extended beyond his own experience. By the time they were finished, the statement read, "Yesterday, during a routine flight, I experienced a situation that unfortunately reminded me of the prejudice that still exists in many spaces. While I faced challenges before, this moment stood out because it wasn't just about me. It was about the countless people who endure similar treatment without the platform to speak up. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. It's about a system that allows bias, whether implicit or explicit, to go unchecked. We all deserve respect, regardless of who we are or where we come from. This isn't a fight against one person. It's a call for accountability and change. Discrimination has no place in the skies or anywhere else. To those who have faced similar situations and felt powerless, know this: you're not alone, and your voice matters." Satisfied, LeBron posted the statement to his social media platforms. Within minutes, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in, ranging from messages of support to stories from people who had faced similar situations. Celebrities, activists, and athletes amplified his message, and within hours, the hashtag #RespectTheSkies was trending worldwide. While the public rallied around LeBron, Kevin was busy behind the scenes. He had already contacted the airline, demanding a formal investigation into the incident. The airline's initial response had been predictably vague, a generic statement promising to look into the matter and emphasizing their commitment to diversity and inclusion. But Kevin wasn't satisfied. He reached out to several civil rights organizations and legal experts, ensuring that the issue wouldn't be swept under the rug. One of those organizations, the National Equality Alliance, quickly offered their support, releasing their own statement that called on the airline to take meaningful action. LeBron appreciated their efforts, but he knew this fight required more than just statements. He decided to take a more active role, agreeing to a series of interviews to discuss the incident and the broader issues it represented. The first interview took place in a quiet studio, the soft lighting and neutral backdrop creating an atmosphere of calm professionalism. LeBron sat across from a seasoned journalist, her notepad resting on her knee as she prepared to begin. "Thank you for sitting down with us, LeBron," she said, her tone warm but direct. "Your statement yesterday struck a chord with millions of people. Can you tell us what motivated you to speak out?" LeBron nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Honestly, it wasn't just about what happened to me. It was about what that moment represented. I've been fortunate to have a platform where my voice can be heard, but there are so many people who don't. They face discrimination every day, and it often goes unnoticed or unaddressed. I wanted to use this moment to shine a light on that. The journalist leaned forward slightly, her pen poised. Do you feel the airline's response has been adequate? LeBron's jaw tightened slightly, but his tone remained measured. Their initial response was disappointing. Words are easy, but actions matter. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for accountability and change. And what would accountability look like to you? The journalist pressed. Accountability starts with transparency, LeBron said firmly. The airline needs to conduct a thorough investigation, not just into this incident, but into their training and policies. They need to ensure that every employee understands the importance of respect and equality, and they need to take real steps to address any gaps in their system. The interview aired later that evening, and the response was immediate. Social media lit up with discussions about discrimination in the travel industry, with countless people sharing their own stories. The hashtag #RespectInTheSkies continued to gain momentum, and several prominent figures joined the conversation, calling on the airline to take meaningful action. But the backlash wasn't limited to social media. Advocacy groups organized protests outside the airline's headquarters, holding signs that read "Respect is non-negotiable" and "Bias has no place in the skies." News outlets picked up the story, further amplifying the pressure on the airline. Meanwhile, the airline's executives scrambled to contain the damage. They announced a formal investigation into the incident and placed the flight attendant on administrative leave pending the outcome. They also scheduled a press conference to address the growing controversy. LeBron watched the coverage from his living room, his expression unreadable. Kevin sat beside him, scrolling through his phone as updates rolled in. "They're feeling the heat," Kevin said with a small smile. They just released another statement, this time promising mandatory bias training for all employees. LeBron nodded but didn't smile. "It's a step," he said quietly. "But it's not enough. This isn't just about training. It's about changing the culture." Kevin looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, this could be bigger than just one airline. If we do this right, we could push for industry-wide changes." LeBron's gaze sharpened, a spark of determination lighting his eyes. "Let's do it," he said. "Let's make this about more than just one flight. Let's make it about the whole system." As the days unfolded, LeBron's fight for accountability grew into a movement. He partnered with civil rights organizations to launch a campaign focused on addressing discrimination in the travel industry. The campaign called for mandatory bias training, better oversight, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination across all airlines. The fight was far from over, but LeBron was ready. This wasn't just about justice for himself, it was about justice for everyone. And he wasn't going to back down. A movement takes flight. The ripple effect of LeBron James's public statement grew into a tidal wave of momentum. Within days, the airline industry found itself under a microscope, with public outcry calling for systemic changes. For LeBron, the incident had transformed into a mission far larger than he could have anticipated. The National Equality Alliance reached out to LeBron with a proposal for a partnership. They wanted to use his platform to launch a nationwide campaign addressing discrimination and bias in customer service industries. The campaign, aptly named Sky Respect, aimed to tackle the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist, starting with airlines but expanding into other areas of public-facing service sectors. LeBron agreed without hesitation. He had always believed in using his platform for more than just sports, and this cause felt deeply personal. His manager, Kevin, worked tirelessly with the alliance to map out the campaign's objectives, which included pushing for legislative action, organizing industry-wide bias training, and creating an anonymous reporting system for travelers to share experiences of discrimination. The first rally. The campaign kicked off with a rally in downtown Los Angeles, where thousands of supporters gathered under the blazing sun. The energy in the air was electric, a mix of determination and hope. People of all ages and backgrounds came, holding signs that read "Respect is a right" and "Dignity in the skies." LeBron stood backstage, flanked by Kevin and a group of civil rights leaders. His presence was magnetic, even in silence. Dressed simply in a black t-shirt emblazoned with the campaign's logo, he exuded a quiet confidence. As the host introduced him, the crowd erupted into applause and cheers. Taking the stage, LeBron paused for a moment, allowing the noise to settle. He adjusted the microphone, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces before him. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady and resonant. "What happened to me on that flight was a reminder that even in places designed for comfort and equality, bias can take root. But this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been treated unfairly because of who they are, where they're from, or what they look like." The crowd roared in agreement, their applause punctuating his words. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. This is about a system, a culture, that allows prejudice to persist unchecked. And I'm here to say enough is enough. We deserve better. We demand better. LeBron's speech lasted less than 10 minutes, but the impact was profound. The rally marked the beginning of Sky Respect's public-facing efforts, with people across the country sharing their own stories on social media, using the hashtag #SkyRespect. The campaign's website, launched that same day, became a hub for resources, including guides on how to report incidents and educational materials on bias and discrimination. Behind closed doors, while the public rallied behind LeBron, the airline executives were scrambling. The growing movement was a public relations nightmare, and the company's stock had taken a noticeable dip as consumers boycotted their services. Faced with mounting pressure, they reached out to LeBron's team, requesting a private meeting to address the situation. Kevin was skeptical. "They're only doing this because their profits are on the line," he said during a late-night strategy session with LeBron. "But maybe we can use this to push for real change." LeBron nodded thoughtfully. "If they're serious about fixing the problem, I'm willing to listen. But I'm not walking into that room just to hear empty apologies. I want commitments, real ones." The meeting took place in a sleek boardroom on the top floor of the airline's corporate headquarters. LeBron, Kevin, and representatives from the National Equality Alliance sat across from a panel of executives. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken stakes. "Mr. James," the CEO began, his tone carefully measured, "let me start by expressing our deepest apologies for the experience you endured on your flight. It was unacceptable and does not reflect the values of our company." LeBron's expression remained neutral. "Apologies are fine," he replied evenly. "But what are you going to do about it?" The room fell silent for a moment, the executives exchanging uneasy glances. Finally, the CEO spoke again. "We've launched an internal investigation and placed the flight attendant on leave. Additionally, we're implementing mandatory bias training for all employees, starting immediately." "That's a start," LeBron said, his gaze steady. "But this issue goes beyond one employee. It's about the culture you've created, or allowed, to exist. Training is great, but how are you going to hold people accountable when they cross the line? How are you going to ensure that every passenger, no matter who they are, feels respected on your flights?" The CEO nodded, visibly uncomfortable under LeBron's scrutiny. "We're open to recommendations," he said cautiously. LeBron leaned forward slightly, his voice firm but calm. "Here's what I recommend. Transparency. Publicly release the findings of your investigation. Show people that you're serious about accountability. And don't stop with bias training. Implement an anonymous reporting system for passengers and employees to flag incidents without fear of retaliation. If you're really committed to change, prove it." The executives exchanged uneasy looks, but the CEO finally nodded. "We'll take that under serious consideration." A surprise ally. As the meeting concluded, LeBron left feeling cautiously optimistic. He knew corporations were slow to change, But he also knew that public pressure could be a powerful motivator. What he didn't expect, however, was an unexpected ally to emerge the following day. A former flight attendant from the same airline reached out to SkyRespect, offering to share her experiences. Her story, aired during a televised interview, painted a damning picture of the airline's internal culture. She described a workplace rife with unspoken biases and a lack of accountability for employees who mistreated passengers based on race, gender, or other factors. LeBron's experience isn't unique, she said during the interview, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. It's just the first time someone with his platform has spoken out. I'm speaking up now because I've seen too many people hurt by this system, and it's time for it to change. Her testimony sparked a new wave of outrage, further fueling the movement. The airline, now under fire from both consumers and former employees, announced an independent review of its policies and practices, building momentum. As SkyRespect gained traction, other airlines began preemptively adopting some of the campaign's recommendations, including bias training and improved reporting systems. Advocacy groups praised LeBron for using his platform to create tangible change, and public opinion overwhelmingly supported the movement. LeBron, however, wasn't resting on his laurels. He knew this was only the beginning. "We've opened the door," he told Kevin during a late-night phone call. "Now we have to walk through it. This can't just be a moment. It has to be a movement." Kevin chuckled. "You're starting to sound like a politician." LeBron smiled, though his tone remained serious. "If that's what it takes to make a difference, so be it." With SkyRespect gaining national attention, LeBron prepared for the next phase of the campaign, taking the fight to Washington. The goal was to push for federal legislation that would mandate anti-bias training and accountability measures across the entire airline industry. LeBron knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but he was ready. For him, this wasn't just about a single flight or a single airline. It was about creating a world where everyone, regardless of their background, could move through life with dignity and respect. And he wouldn't stop until that world became a reality. Taking the fight to Washington. The campaign had gained remarkable traction. Within weeks, #SkyRespect became a symbol of dignity and accountability, transcending its original focus on airlines. LeBron James, who was once reluctant to make the incident about himself, had now become the face of a larger movement. But as the spotlight intensified, so did the challenges. LeBron knew that the next phase would require a level of persistence and strategy far beyond anything he'd faced on the court. The stakes were higher now. This was no longer just about systemic change in one industry. This was about setting a precedent for how institutions address discrimination and bias. The congressional hearing. It started with an invitation. The House Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties requested LeBron to testify during an upcoming hearing on workplace and service discrimination. The news made national headlines, with commentators debating the implications of a high-profile athlete stepping into the political arena. Kevin was cautiously optimistic when they received the invite. "This is big, LeBron," he said during a meeting in their campaign headquarters. "But it's not going to be easy. They'll try to spin this, make it look like you're overstepping." LeBron leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Let them try," he replied. "This isn't about politics. It's about doing what's right. If my name gets more people to pay attention, then that's what I'll do." When the day of the hearing arrived, the atmosphere in Washington was electric. Reporters lined the steps of the Capitol, their cameras trained on the entrance. LeBron arrived in a tailored suit, his presence commanding respect. He was accompanied by Kevin, representatives from the National Equality Alliance, and a handful of supporters who had shared their stories of discrimination. The hearing room was packed with lawmakers, journalists, and activists. LeBron's statement, prepared meticulously with his team, was concise but powerful. When his name was called, he stood and approached the witness table, his every step deliberate. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak today," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not here as a celebrity or an athlete. I'm here as a person who experienced something that far too many people endure every day: disrespect, bias, and discrimination. And I'm here to say that it has to stop. He recounted the incident on the flight, not as a singular event, but as a representation of a broader issue. He highlighted the stories of others who had shared their experiences with SkyRespect, weaving their voices into his testimony. This isn't just about airlines, he said, his tone resolute. This is about creating systems of accountability so that no one, no matter who they are, has to face this kind of treatment. It's about recognizing that bias, whether intentional or not, has real consequences. As he spoke, the room was silent. Even the most skeptical lawmakers seemed unable to dismiss the weight of his words. When he finished, the audience erupted into applause, a rare moment in such a formal setting. Building legislative momentum. LeBron's testimony was a turning point. Following the hearing, lawmakers introduced the Passenger Dignity and Equality Act, a bill aimed at mandating anti-bias training for all airline employees, establishing independent oversight for passenger complaints, and creating penalties for companies that failed to address systemic discrimination. The bill faced immediate resistance from industry lobbyists, who argued that the proposed regulations were too costly and unnecessary. LeBron, however, was undeterred. He doubled down on his advocacy, using his platform to rally public support. In the weeks that followed, LeBron appeared on major news networks, participated in town halls, and met with community leaders to build momentum for the bill. His message was clear. This isn't about punishment. It's about creating a system where everyone is treated with respect. The campaign's grassroots efforts were equally impactful. SkyRespect organized rallies in major cities, bringing together diverse coalitions of supporters. People from all walks of life shared their stories, emphasizing that discrimination wasn't confined to one industry or demographic. The backlash. As the movement grew, so did the backlash. Critics accused LeBron of overreacting, claiming that the incident on the flight had been blown out of proportion. Some questioned his motives, suggesting that his activism was a calculated move to stay relevant off the court. LeBron took the criticism in stride, refusing to be derailed. "This isn't about me," he reiterated during an interview with a prominent journalist. "This is about the countless people who've experienced the same thing but didn't have the platform to speak out. If my name makes people uncomfortable, that's fine. What's not fine is ignoring the problem." Still, the attacks became increasingly personal. Anonymous online campaigns attempted to discredit him, digging into his past and fabricating controversies. Kevin worked tirelessly to counter the misinformation, while LeBron remained focused on the mission. "You've been through worse," Kevin reminded him during a late-night strategy session. "This is just noise." LeBron nodded, his determination unwavering. "Let them talk. The truth is louder." Allies stepped forward. Despite the criticism, LeBron's efforts began to inspire others to step forward. Fellow athletes, celebrities, and even corporate leaders expressed their support for SkyRespect, using their own platforms to amplify the movement's message. One particularly influential ally was a former CEO of a major airline, who publicly endorsed the campaign. In an op-ed for a national newspaper, he wrote, "LeBron James is right. The airline industry, and service industries as a whole, must confront the biases that exist within their cultures. It's not just about avoiding lawsuits, it's about building trust and respect." The endorsement was a significant win for the campaign, lending credibility to its demands and putting additional pressure on lawmakers to act. A global impact. As the movement gained international attention, other countries began examining their own practices. Advocacy groups in Europe, Asia, and Africa reached out to SkyRespect, seeking guidance on how to implement similar initiatives. What had started as a response to one incident was now becoming a global conversation about dignity and respect. LeBron, while humbled by the movement's growth, remained grounded. During a press conference in New York, he addressed the broader implications of the campaign. "This isn't just about airlines or one industry," he said. It's about challenging the ways we allow bias to persist in our daily lives. It's about holding ourselves and each other accountable. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. Pushing toward the vote. As the vote on the Passenger Dignity and Equality Act approached, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Lobbyists intensified their efforts to derail the bill, while supporters worked tirelessly to rally lawmakers. LeBron made one final trip to Washington, meeting with key senators and representatives to make the case for the bill. He listened to their concerns, countered their arguments, and shared the stories of people who had reached out to him through SkyRespect. "You have the power to set a standard," he told one senator during a private meeting. "This isn't just a political issue, it's a human one." When the day of the vote arrived, the nation held its breath. Crowds gathered outside the Capitol, holding signs and chanting slogans in support of the bill. Inside, LeBron and Kevin watched from the gallery as the votes were tallied. It was close, closer than anyone had anticipated. But when the final count was announced, the bill passed by a narrow margin. The room erupted into applause, and LeBron felt a wave of relief and pride. This was only the beginning, but it was a victory, a step toward a world where respect wasn't just an ideal but a reality. As he walked out of the Capitol that day, surrounded by supporters and reporters, LeBron knew that the journey wasn't over. But for the first time, he felt that real change was possible, and that was worth everything. A legacy of change. The passage of the Passenger Dignity and Equality Act marked a historic moment, not only for the airline industry, but for systemic accountability in public-facing institutions. LeBron James stood at the forefront of this transformation, his efforts inspiring millions and setting a powerful precedent. However, the work was far from over. The passing of legislation was a critical step, but LeBron knew that meaningful change required vigilance, persistence, and the willingness to continue fighting for the voices that often went unheard. The implementation phase. The months following the bill's passage were a whirlwind of activity. Airlines across the country scrambled to meet the new requirements, with oversight committees ensuring compliance. Bias training programs became mandatory for all employees, from frontline staff to executives. Independent review boards were established to handle passenger complaints, giving travelers a clear and fair process for addressing grievances. LeBron and the SkyRespect team closely monitored the implementation. They conducted surprise audits, issued reports on the progress of major airlines, and partnered with consumer advocacy groups to ensure the new systems were both effective and accessible. One of the first major tests of the new system came when a passenger filed a complaint against an airline for discriminatory treatment. Unlike before, where such cases were often dismissed or buried under corporate bureaucracy, the independent review board took swift action. Within weeks, the passenger received a formal apology, and the airline employee responsible underwent additional training and disciplinary measures. The case made headlines, with LeBron's name once again linked to the movement. In interviews, he emphasized that the success wasn't his alone. "This is what happens when people come together to demand better," he said during an appearance on a popular morning show. "It's proof that change is possible when we hold each other accountable." Expanding the mission. While the airline industry remained the focal point of SkyRespect, LeBron and his team saw an opportunity to expand the mission. Discrimination wasn't limited to the skies, and other industries could benefit from similar reforms. The campaign launched new initiatives targeting hospitality, retail, and public transportation, each with tailored goals to address the unique challenges of those sectors. One of the most ambitious projects was a collaboration with the National Equality Alliance to create an educational platform for service workers. The platform, called RespectWorks, offered interactive courses on cultural sensitivity, implicit bias, and conflict resolution. It also included real-life scenarios and testimonials from individuals who had experienced discrimination, providing a human perspective on the impact of bias. LeBron personally participated in several of the platform's promotional videos, speaking directly to service workers. "Respect is the foundation of everything we do," he said in one video. When we treat each other with dignity, we build stronger communities, stronger workplaces, and stronger industries. This isn't just about doing what's right. It's about making the world better for all of us. The global stage. As the Sky Respect movement expanded its reach, it began to attract international attention. Advocacy groups from Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America sought to replicate its model, adapting the principles to fit their local contexts. LeBron, who had always viewed his platform as global, embraced the opportunity to collaborate with these groups. In one particularly memorable trip, LeBron visited South Africa, where he spoke at a summit on diversity and inclusion in the travel industry. Standing before a diverse audience of industry leaders and activists, he shared the lessons of Sky Respect and encouraged them to take bold action in their own countries. This movement started because of one incident, he said, his voice resonating through the packed auditorium. But it's grown because people around the world have recognized that respect isn't optional, it's essential. It doesn't matter where you're from or what you do. Dignity is a universal right, and it's up to all of us to protect it. The summit concluded with the signing of a global pledge by dozens of industry leaders, committing to adopt anti-discrimination measures and improve accountability in their operations. It was another milestone, and one that LeBron knew would have a lasting impact. Personal reflection. Despite the movement's success, the journey had taken a toll on LeBron. Late nights, relentless public scrutiny, and the weight of the cause often left him drained. There were moments of doubt, times when he questioned whether the fight was worth the cost. But then he would receive letters and messages from people whose lives had been changed because of Sky Respect. A young woman who found the courage to report workplace discrimination. A single father whose dignity was restored after being mistreated on a flight. A family who felt safe traveling for the first time in years. These stories reminded LeBron why he had started the fight in the first place. It wasn't about accolades or headlines. It was about people. Real people who deserved the same respect and dignity that he demanded for himself. One evening, as he sat in his home office reviewing campaign updates, he received a video message from a mother and her teenage son. The boy, wearing a basketball jersey with LeBron's name on it, spoke directly into the camera. "Thank you, Mr. James," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Because of you, my mom doesn't feel scared to fly anymore. You're my hero." LeBron watched the video twice, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Moments like these were his fuel, his reminder that the fight was far from over, but also that it was worth every effort. A legacy of empowerment. Years later, as LeBron reflected on his journey, he realized that Sky Respect had become more than a campaign. It was a legacy, a blueprint for how individuals could challenge systems and demand better. The airline industry was unrecognizable from what it had been when he first stepped onto that fateful flight. Policies were stronger, passengers were empowered, and respect was no longer an aspiration but a standard. LeBron's efforts extended beyond Sky Respect. Inspired by the success of the movement, he established the Dignity Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to eradicating systemic bias in all forms. The foundation worked with schools, corporations, and governments to promote equality and create opportunities for marginalized communities. But for LeBron, the greatest reward was knowing that his actions had empowered others to speak out and stand up for what was right. The incident that had sparked the movement was no longer a point of anger. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, change was possible. As he prepared for another speech, this time to a group of young activists, LeBron smiled. His journey had taken him far beyond the basketball court, but his mission had remained the same: to inspire, to lead, and to create a better world for the generations to come. The legacy of Sky Respect would endure, not because of his name, but because of the millions who had embraced its message. And for LeBron James, that was the greatest victory of all. A legacy of change. As the years passed, the impact of the Sky Respect movement and the accompanying Passenger Dignity and Equality Act became undeniable. Airlines worldwide had adopted the policies initially driven by LeBron's advocacy. Incidents of passenger mistreatment significantly decreased, and many companies reported that their employees felt more empowered and educated about handling diversity and bias in their roles. But LeBron's mission didn't stop there. He viewed the campaign not as an endpoint, but as the foundation of a broader societal shift. The Dignity Foundation expanded its reach, addressing systemic inequality in education, housing, and healthcare, areas where respect and fairness were often lacking. A broader vision. LeBron often met with young leaders from underserved communities, mentoring them and sharing his own experiences of adversity and triumph. These meetings became some of the most rewarding aspects of his work. He frequently emphasized the importance of standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. "Change starts with us," he told a group of high school students during a visit to his hometown of Akron. "It starts with how we treat each other, how we demand accountability, and how we refuse to stay silent when we see injustice. I didn't always have a platform like this, but I always had a voice, and so do you." His words resonated deeply with the students, many of whom went on to become activists and community leaders in their own right. LeBron's example became a powerful reminder that greatness wasn't just about personal achievements, it was about lifting others up and creating opportunities for those who came after. The Hall of Justice Gala. To celebrate the 5th anniversary of Sky Respect, the Dignity Foundation hosted a gala event in Los Angeles. The Hall of Justice Gala brought together civil rights leaders, industry executives, policymakers, and celebrities to honor the progress made and highlight the work still to be done. LeBron, as the evening's keynote speaker, took the stage to a standing ovation. Dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, he looked out over the audience, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "5 years ago, I boarded a flight expecting nothing more than a quiet trip," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What I got was a reminder of the work we still have to do to ensure that everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve. That moment could have been just another frustrating experience, one I brushed off and moved on from. But together, we turned it into a movement." The audience applauded, the sound echoing through the grand hall. "We've made incredible strides," LeBron continued. "But let me be clear, the fight isn't over. Bias doesn't disappear overnight, and systems don't change without consistent pressure. That's why we're here tonight, not just to celebrate our victories, but to recommit ourselves to the mission." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us. It's about the person who feels invisible in their workplace, the passenger who feels like they don't belong, the child who wonders if they're valued. This is their fight, and it's our responsibility to keep going." By the time he finished his speech, the audience was on its feet, applauding not just the man but the movement he had championed. The gala raised millions of dollars for the Dignity Foundation's initiatives, ensuring that its impact would continue to grow. The next generation. LeBron often reflected on the legacy he was leaving, not just for his family, but for the countless people who looked up to him. His children, now young adults, were following in his footsteps in their own ways. His oldest son, the budding athlete with a keen sense of justice, had taken an active role in the foundation, working on projects aimed at empowering young people. During a family dinner one evening, his son asked him, "Dad, when did you know this was your purpose? Beyond basketball, I mean." LeBron smiled, his gaze thoughtful. "I think I've always known," he replied. "Even when I was just a kid in Akron, I knew I wanted to do more than just play ball. I wanted to make a difference." The flight, that moment, it just gave me the push I needed to step into that purpose fully. His son nodded, clearly inspired. "I want to do that too. I want to make a difference." "You will," LeBron said, his voice filled with pride. "And you'll do it in your own way. That's the beauty of this work. It's not about any one person. It's about the collective effort. A world transformed." Years later, as LeBron walked through the bustling terminals of a newly renovated airport, He couldn't help but notice the changes his efforts had brought about. Signs promoting anti-bias initiatives were prominently displayed, and interactive kiosks allowed passengers to report any concerns anonymously. Travelers of all backgrounds moved through the space with a sense of ease and belonging. A young flight attendant recognized him and approached hesitantly. "Mr. James," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted to say thank you. I joined this industry because of you, because of what you did with Sky Respect. It made me realize I could be part of the change." LeBron smiled warmly, shaking her hand. "Thank you for carrying the torch," he replied. "This work belongs to all of us now." As he boarded his flight, he settled into his seat, reflecting on how far the journey had come. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better, more equitable, more respectful, and more aware. And in the quiet moments at 35,000 feet, he allowed himself to feel pride, not in his fame or fortune, but in the legacy he had built through determination, courage, and a commitment to justice. For LeBron James, the court would always be where his story began, but it was in the skies and beyond that he found his true purpose, and that legacy would soar for generations to come.